everybody? I've got another very special guest for y'all this week. Everybody, please welcome to the show, Caleb Palmquist. Welcome, Caleb.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for stopping by. So, Caleb, honestly, you came across my desk as a possible interview, and I was really excited because you were somebody that was looking into trying to get on the show for a while now. Because
Ha!
I really like Vampire Detective in Space, and then recently discovered Unicorn Vampire Hunter through Scout Comics, and just been backing and reading your stuff for a while. So it's a pleasure.
Well, thank you so much.
Uh, so first time being on the show, I got to put you through the gauntlet. So please regale us with the quest of your origin stories. How did you get here?
Sure. Um, I have always wanted to tell stories. When I graduated high school, I went to film school, and then realized I didn't really um, want to die on the altar of capitalism. So I quit film school and I started writing. Um, and uh, then I've always just been really into comics in general. And then about 7, 8 years ago, I looked around and I thought, well, what am I waiting for? I learned about Kickstarter and I just started making a comic. And I went deeply into debt, and nobody wanted the comic. And and then I sort of slowly clawed my way out of it. Had a few things that people seemed to like, and yeah, so now I'm just trying to tell as many stories as I can and write as many comics as I can. And yeah, so I started out trying to do film, decided I didn't want to do that, and then sort of pivoted a little while after that into making comics. And I think that that is where I want to be. Sometimes people ask me, well, you started out in film. Do you want your comics to be adapted to film? And, my answer is always like, well, I mean, that would be awesome, but I didn't write them to be movies. I wrote them to be comics. So, um, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, especially Unicorn, which we'll get much more in depth throughout the episode, but because you are currently trying to kickstart Volume 1, the collected trade.
hmm
But that, especially that art style and everything, like that would be really cool as like an animated feature or something. I think that's the way to go with that one.
For sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I would absolutely love that. I think that would be very, very cool. So maybe someday, fingers crossed. But yeah, I think and Daryl, who draws the book, is definitely um, he draws in a very animated style. Like I wouldn't be shocked to see that style in a cartoon. So for sure.
Yeah, I half expected him to be the artist for like the Saturday morning cartoon comics that IDW is putting out right now because he's got like that perfect style for it. So you said you were always kind of into comics and everything. Are you still somebody who reads comics on the regular? Like you got a weekly pull list at a shop or anything like that?
I do have a pull list, but it's way more limited than what it used to be. So back around the time when I had a pull list in college, and then after college, when I first started, working full time, I had a larger pull list and was spending a lot of money on comics, and just like, time wore me down, and tried to be smarter about money. Plus, I started investing money into making comics. So I do have a pull list now, but there's only a few books on there. Like right now, I'm reading um, Kirkman's Firepower. Well, actually, it might have been a little while since an issue of that came out, but that was one of the things on my list. Um, and then every once in a while, I'll put, if friends of mine have independent comics coming out through, or rather, small press comics coming out through Diamond or Lunar, I'll pre-order those. Um, and I try to keep up with mainstream comics. I just don't buy them anymore because I don't have the bandwidth or the money, but I was really into TMNT and Spider-Man for a while.
Okay, so a little bit of Marvel guy then.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there have been the occasional DC books that I have gotten really into, but going back. I mean, when I was a kid, I had like 3 issues of Ultimate X-Men that I think my grandma gave me that she found at the mall or something, and I read those things like 1,000 times. So like X-Men was my jam growing up, and then later on, I got more into Spider-Man, and so I've always had more of an affinity for those characters.
I love that Ultimates line. Like I got into it late, but when I did, I went hard into it. And now that it's like pseudo coming back, I'm so fucking excited, man.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. I mean, Jonathan Hickman too is going to have a different take on it. That's who's doing it, right? Jonathan Hickman.
Yeah, he's doing the Ultimate Invasion book, which I just read the other day, so it's got to be sitting over here. Yep, Ultimate Invasion #1 came out, and it's. I mean, we're supposed to be talking about Caleb's books, but if you haven't read this, everybody read it. It's fucking awesome. Uh,
Okay,
um, yeah, so I'm really excited for that book.
cool.
Um, yeah, so I mean, I first discovered you because you had the book Vampire Detective in Space, which I thought, I mean, with a book that has that title, it's got to be good. I love vampires. I like detective stories, and I'm a big sci-fi space fan. So, what could go wrong with that? So, I mean, where did that book come from for you
Oh
in terms
well,
of the idea?
that book actually has a sort of complicated origin story because so my first comic that I made was called A Small Favor, which is like this sci-fi space opera thing that I wrote with a buddy of mine, and I had like 10 volumes planned, and it's like your standard like first comic, way too ambitious. And I think some people liked it, but it definitely wasn't. It was confusing and long, and the art was all over the place. But I really liked some of the characters that I wrote for that book, and I wanted to find a way to bring them back in a way that was um, more appealing to a wider audience. And and I had already been doing Unicorn Vampire Hunter, and so I was like, why not just do another vampire book? Make the main character of A Small Favor a vampire, and then bring over a few of the other characters from that other book, and give it a smaller, concise, uh, more heartfelt storyline. And that's what I did. So it's basically like I mean, we're in the era of multiverse movies, right? So
Mhm.
it's basically like a multiverse, like a different universe version of these characters. And that's Yeah, that's pretty much where it came from. So I was able to tell some of the stories I wanted to tell with those characters, but using what I've learned about comics and storytelling since I wrote that first comic.
Yeah, I really enjoy it because it's a fun little space story, but you, all the elements that I mentioned that are in the title, like they're all there. Like it's a detective story in space, but you got the vampire lead character, and the art's just phenomenal. I really enjoy it personally.
Well, thank you.
Uh,
I mean, Vampire Detective in Space did not do as well for me as Unicorn Vampire Hunter has done. I mean, it did great. Like we funded all 4 issues, and we're coming back later this year with the collected edition, but it didn't do as well. But I'm very proud of the story that I told, and Dave Swartz, who drew that book, and I are definitely not done collaborating. We have another project that we're going to be announcing soon that I can't talk about, but we'll be announcing soon, that he and I are doing together that I'm super excited about. Um, so yeah, I when you find someone who's that talented and that like awesome to work with, you don't just let them go after you do one book. You're just like, what are we going to do next? So yeah.
you find a way to stick together. Yep. And then yeah, so after that, your name kind of got on my radar, and I was a little late on Unicorn Vampire Hunter. I think you were kickstarting issue 4 or 3 at that point. Um, when like you were popping up on my Kickstarter feed and everything. And then I discovered one day when I'm flipping through my previous catalog that it's also coming out through Scout.
Yeah.
So I pre-ordered it that way, and really enjoyed that first issue. Um, I don't think they've released any more issues since then, but they do that weird thing where they wait a few months in between the first and second.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So the future of that is kind of up in the air, but um, it's with independent publishing or small press publishing, you're always like kind of doing Kickstarter too, and so um, if it like the that's what we're kickstarting right now is the collected edition, my collected edition, which is uh, the whole first story arc. And the really cool thing about that is um, that on Kickstarter you can do like fancy stuff that you just couldn't do through the direct market. Not
Mhm.
unless you're like Kirkman or someone, right? So like
Yeah.
so the fanciest edition of the book that I have on Kickstarter is like this like collector's edition, cloth bound, silver engraved, like um gilded page edges, like just like the fanciest thing I could imagine. Uh and it's possible through Kickstarter, whereas, it just wouldn't be otherwise, which is, one of the things I love about crowdfunding.
Yeah, I love that cover because I mean, Unicorn has that fairy tale vibe to it,
Hmm.
and that cover gives it more of a fairy tale vibe, like the old school fairy tales. Like you would go to when Borders was a thing, you go to Borders, get those collected of all of the like classic fairy tales or whatever in that style. And I actually, it's funny because I have Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the complete series, in a book like that too. So like that style, I always really liked. It's cool. It's unique. It gives something kind of flavorful to it.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you was Unicorn the first book that you got into a publisher, or have you had other stuff that have gone through?
Yes, that was Unicorn was the first one. Um, and I have sort of like shopped some other things around, but I will say that my experience with independent publishing has been really positive.
Hmm.
And so for most of the things that I've got coming up, I'm while I'm always like keeping an eye out for like what kind of publishers I might be able to go with, I'm also like very aware that I'm able to reach an audience through Kickstarter that, I mean, that's growing while the direct market is shrinking. Obviously direct market can still hit bigger numbers than Kickstarter can generally, but, um, but I would definitely encourage anyone out there who's doing independent books and like looking for a publisher to just like, be aware that you can do it yourself. Like you don't need a publisher. And it's very validating to get that publishing deal. But I also have found that it's really not the be all end all. It's like we're making stuff, and if you can keep telling stories and connecting with people, that's the most important part.
Yeah, I always get from creators that the direct market publishing line for smaller creators, like you said, if you're a Kirkman or a Brubaker or whatever, you're going to make your bones and make your money in the direct market, no problem. But for smaller creators, indie creators, it's more like a tool in the tool belt.
Oh
Like
yeah,
you get it to the direct market, and it would be nice if it hit huge and you made all this money and then became a name and all this stuff. But um, reality sinks in, and what your real goal is to get it into a lot of different stores, hoping to find a new audience that maybe one day will support you in the future with whatever you do, but also possibly jump over to Kickstarter for whatever you're doing as well.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's like it's another method to get the word out. Um, and because you also have to think about how many books are coming out every month through the direct market. It's a lot, even through just like you got the big two has a ton, but also just small publishers have a lot of books every month that are coming out, and that's a lot of competition. Um, and and it's hard to stand out. And so, it's cool. It's gratifying to be out there. but in the end, like when you're independently publishing, you have that total control, and you have the ability to like really speak with backers, like the people who are supporting you directly, which is really cool. And that's just not something you get through the direct market. Like I have sales numbers from the direct market, like with that first issue. So I know like how many issues went to shops, but like I don't have any concept of how many people went into a store and bought one, and I don't know who those people are. And I realize that's how sales have worked forever, but I think from that part I've missed the direct connection that Kickstarter gives me. That ability to see who's supporting me, and then people to give me feedback. Because the other thing is like, how often do you go to a comic book store, buy a new book, and then email the creator and say like, this was awesome, or whatever, like, uh, not super often.
Unless you host a comic book podcast, not that often.
Right, right. I'm sure you get to talk to creators all the time, which is awesome.
Yeah,
And I've run into a few writers, famous writers that I really admired at cons and stuff, and that was really cool. Um, but you know, it's a different experience. So I guess what I'm saying is uh, that like you said, the direct market distribution is another tool in the toolkit, but I don't see it as the end destination.
definitely. And something you said there clicks with me. I'd love to hear more about it. But when you're using Kickstarter and you're getting that feedback, does that feedback ever go directly into the product? Like, let's say Unicorn issue one comes out, you do pretty well, and people start giving you feedback, like, I like this, but this thing didn't work or whatever. Do you start to like tweak with the series and be like, oh, maybe they're right? Or has that ever happened to you?
That's a good question. I think kind of, yeah. I mean, I think that when I get feedback where people like really like a certain character, I will tend to feature that character more in the future. And I also, um, I mean, people don't tend to be overly critical when they're giving feedback, like unsolicited feedback through Kickstarter, right? Like if I ask people for their honest feedback, people will give it to me. But a lot of times, like the people who reach out are the people who are really excited about it.
Mhm.
But I think that the best answer I can give is that the more enthusiastic feedback I get about a series, the more interested I am in continuing that series. Um, and the more I have invested in it. And that sounds really vain, but if I put out like Unicorn Vampire Hunter, I get positive feedback all the time. Like I put issues out, I send them out. People email me back and say that they really liked it, or that this plot line or this plot line was really gut wrenching or whatever, and that's really exciting to me. So I that's like a big driver. And I got some of that for Vampire Detective in Space too, but I've also done other projects where it's like, just like crickets. And so and that's not a complaint. That's like just me being like, there's a real gauge there. Like there's a real organic gauge of what people are into. And that sweet spot of what I'm looking for is what I'm into and what people on Kickstarter are into too, right? Um, which is why I think like Unicorn Vampire Hunter is so cool, because I love the story. Even if I had never put it on Kickstarter, never sold it, I would be like doodling this idea in my notebooks, right? Because I'm just like, I think it's really fun. But people do respond well to it. So then, and people, email me or come up to me at cons and tell me what they liked about it. And that's really gratifying, and it really keeps me going. I don't know if I've ever had someone give a suggestion that then I just like incorporated into the comic, but I would say people have managed to nudge me in terms of if they really liked a character. Like I'll say Unicorn Vampire Hunter is a good example, because they're in the first issue, and spotted throughout the first story arc. They're the magical puppies that never grow old. And people love the magical puppies. And this is like maybe a tiny spoiler in the second arc of the story. The magical puppies play a larger role because people really liked the puppies and they wanted more stuff with the puppies. Um,
Hmm.
and so issue 7 is actually a totally puppy centric issue. So yeah, I guess the short answer to your question is yes. Sometimes people's feedback does influence what happens in the story.
Very cool. So we've mentioned it a bunch of times, and it is the book we're mostly here to talk about. So why don't you give it like the synopsis of what Unicorn Vampire Hunter is, and then we can kind of move from there with the
Sure.
Kickstarter.
So, Unicorn Vampire Hunter is about a unicorn who hunts vampires with his horn, and it's a fairy tale fantasy adventure book. It's about found family and forgiveness. Um, and yeah, that's it. It's fairy tale, unicorn, vampires. He stabs the unicorn. I mean, sorry, he stabs the vampires with his horn. And people ask me all the time, how did you come up with that? And I'm like, I don't know. I've always liked vampires. I've always liked unicorns. I have a poster of a unicorn that I got when I was 6 years old, and I've had it on every wall in every home I've ever lived in. Not every wall, but I mean, it's been on the wall in every home I've ever lived in since I was 6 years old. It's just like this poster I was really fond of. It's a unicorn standing on a bridge with a rainbow behind him, and like, I, um, and I just seemed natural to me that a unicorn would stab a vampire with his horn.
I mean, if a unicorn's going to hunt vampires, I imagine that would be the method.
Yeah, I
They
think
don't have
so.
much other of a method.
Yeah.
Um, I wouldn't say combining those two seem natural because to me, I look at it, I'm like, this is crazy, and that's why I wanted to read it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so we talked a little bit about it. You've been successful with it on Kickstarter. You got issue 1 published through Scout, and now you're back on Kickstarter with volume 1. I mean, how's volume 1 been for the Kickstarter so far? I mean, I see you funded,
Oh
but
yeah.
do you have a lot of people coming back from the other 5 issues?
That's a good question. It's been a little bit of a mix. It's obviously doing extremely well. I knew that it would, but I also knew going into it that there would be people who had backed the 5 issues previously, and everyone's, sort of got their preference for uh how they like to read comics. Guys like you and me who go to the store and get issues week by week, like that's what we're used to, right?
Hmm.
And but there's definitely a whole contingent of readers who would prefer to only have the trade paperback, and I totally get that, or the hardcover or whatever it is. Um, and so it's been a mix. Some people have definitely come back, which I definitely appreciate. And there's also been a lot of new people who like a handful of people have messaged me to say that they were waiting for this, right? That they had either only backed digitally before or they hadn't backed at all because they were waiting for the collected edition, which is awesome. And I've been experimenting lately on Kickstarter with different formats. I did a comic book earlier this year that was a straight to graphic novel, the whole graphic novel all at once, which is a big risk, right? Because it's cost more money and I have to raise more money. Um, but people seem to respond to that well. Um, yeah, so I'm very pleased with how it's going. Um, this is definitely a book that I'm always feel confident going into Kickstarter with, because it's always done very well. And yeah, this campaign has not been an exception to that.
Yeah, I've seen with a lot of these collected editions, it's really cool, and I know a lot of people do prefer collected. I'm not opposed to collected editions. I obviously buy quite a few of those as well. But I I've noticed on Kickstarter how it can be a little bit harder because I'll take me for instance. Like I buy my books week to week, and we'll stick with our Marvel DC stuff, and you have to be really special. I mean, I'm not saying anything about you, but I'm just saying that the story has to be really special for me to want to double dip on it.
Oh
So the
yeah.
fact that you're getting people to double dip is really cool. That shows that there's people that really love the story. Um,
Yeah. And
but
I
that also makes it harder on Kickstarter to get the funding for a collector's edition.
For sure. And I actually don't expect this one to do as well. I did a campaign last year for issues 4 and 5, which are the final two issues of the first arc. And that I don't expect this one to do as well as that one.
Mhm.
Because there really is like barely any new content in the book. And but for those people who prefer the single issues, I will be coming back early next year with another 2 issues continuing the story. Um, and yeah, so hopefully this way people get the story in the format that they want, and no one feels pressured to back something that is a story that they already have.
And for those that do want to double dip, I mean, you said there wasn't much in terms of new content, but what new content did you put in?
So there's um, the gallery of covers and pinups, and that's not new. That's all stuff that had been put in previous Kickstarters, but not necessarily published in the books, like prints and stuff like that. But then there's also a 6-page bonus story that's drawn by Dave Swartz, who does Vampire Detective in Space. And it is not critical to the story, but I think it deepens the understanding of the relationship between two particular characters in the book. Um, and so that's going to be included. Now, for those people who have been following along and getting the single issues, I'm also going to be offering a way for them to get that bonus story as an ash can. After the campaign, we're going to open up a pre-order store for the book, and that ash can is going to be available, and we're only going to print enough to fulfill the orders that we get. Um, so that way that people who are completionists but didn't want the collected edition could get that book, and then I'll also be sending that digitally to people who have backed the previous issues, so that they can catch up on the story. Um, in terms of that little extra bonus story, it's a little character moment that I think is really cool. Um, but I yeah, that's pretty much it. 6-page
Yeah.
bonus story.
That's really cool that you're going to make it available to those people too, because you see, it seems a little predatory at times when they're like, we put this little story in, and then it'll never be printed anywhere else.
Right. Yeah, and that was my big concern. I like went back and forth on whether or not to do the bonus story at all. And I ended up deciding that the only way I felt comfortable doing it was to be able to offer it to those previous backers. So, for the people who backed, the 5 issues prior, I'm just going to send that digital story to them for free. And then, any of them that want the printed edition will be able to order it. Um, like I said, I didn't want to be predatory. Um,
Yeah.
so it's a tough balance, right? Because like Kickstarter is kind of built around the concept of like FOMO,
Hmm.
um, but also it feels like maybe a bridge too far to say the only way to get this 6 additional pages of story is to pay $40 for a collected edition.
Yeah.
So
It's a little rough. Yeah, I agree. Like Kickstarter is the FOMO machine, but I almost feel like we're at a point with it where it has to be, because I feel like as a backer, I don't know, you feel you feel this weird sense of entitlement when you're a backer,
uh
where
huh.
like you, it's almost like you deserve something unique and special. You know what I mean?
I totally get it, and I mean, I think for me the part of Kickstarter that I am really identify as a backer on is board game Kickstarter. I've probably backed more board games on Kickstarter than I have comic books, and so whenever I look to like what's the backer experience like, I think about my experience as a backer on those campaigns. Um, And I totally agree because you're like, okay, well, what little bonus expansion am I going to get that the people who buy it at Target aren't going to get? Like,
Yeah.
uh, and and that's kind of silly. And I actually really respect when I see board game publishers or independent designers of board games who put out games on Kickstarter where they're like, this is exactly the same game that's going to be in the retail edition. Like, you're just going to get it sooner. And I actually really respect that. Um, that said, the way that I approach it as a creator on Kickstarter is that I like to add in a lot of little extra goodies and stuff. Like, for example, I have these stickers that I do, and I do trading cards, and I do prints and other stuff like that. And then, of course, like variant covers that are only available through Kickstarter. And I just like try to offer more little extra goodies that aren't necessarily like extra content per se.
Yeah.
So like if you're catching up now and you just want to go to my website or go to a store that carries my books, you'll be able to get all the books. Uh, it's just you might not get like the trading cards that came with that campaign or whatever, and like you know, so I don't know. It's a balance between what do I offer exclusively to Kickstarter backers and what do I offer later on. Um, so that I can take advantage of that FOMO machine, like you said, but also not feel like I'm taking advantage of people. And it's like a weird line. Business is weird like that anyway, though. Like I just don't like being a businessman, but I've had to learn to do that part of it because you
It's
have
an
to sell
unfortunate
stuff.
reality. Yeah.
Yeah, you got to sell stuff. Like if I don't sell stuff, I can't make more stuff. So uh, yeah, it's a fine line I think that I find myself walking all the time.
I always feel like comics got it easy in that sense because you could just say, "Oh, Kickstarter exclusive cover." There you
Yeah,
go.
it's true. It's true.
But yeah, so your campaign's going on. Like we said, it's all funded. You've got well, three covers, but four different tiers. So you got A cover and B cover for the soft edition, the A cover again for a hardcover, and then we talked about that unique hardcover edition as well. And then all the tiers in between. But what I liked about your campaign was it's simple. There's not a lot of fluff. It's just here's the covers. Do you want all four? Here's all four. Uh,
Yep.
and you didn't go too extreme with it. So I'm assuming that was a choice, and if so, I'd love to hear why you went that route.
Oh, sure. I mean, okay, this is, I want to say my 19th Kickstarter, and I, over time, have really learned that simple is better. And there are some things that have helped me make that decision. For example, Kickstarter added add-ons finally a while ago, which is huge. So
Awesome
now
feature.
yes, it's amazing. So now I keep my tiers simple because like before add-ons, you had to be like, oh well, I got to make all the add-ons so that I mean all the tiers so that people could like get the combination of things they want or whatever, and it was very complicated. And now I'm like, okay, as simple as I can with the tiers, and then I'll do add-ons. And then the other thing is that I use BackerKit, and now people are split sometimes on. Sometimes people feel annoyed that they have to do a BackerKit survey after. I will say that you know, Kickstarter is doing their beta test of Pledge Manager integrated with Kickstarter, and I might switch over to that later on if it's good. But um, when you get the backer kit survey, that's when like be like, okay, all my stuff ever. Like if you want to add on other books and like other little things. But I like to keep it as simple as possible on Kickstarter because I think that having a million choices is just confusing. Um, and I think that it it provides it puts up more barriers, right? Um, and the more barriers that there are between a backer and pledging, then like the less likely they are to pledge at all. In my experience, um, there are exceptions to that. You see campaigns that are like ridiculously complicated and are still funding with like a ton of money, But I think a lot of times that comes down to who's running it, like what kind of you know, reputation they have, or there's a couple of other factors that might contribute to something like that. But in general, I want to make the experience easy and fun for people. So uh, I always try to keep it as simple as possible.
Yeah, and so as I've mentioned like 4 times already, you've already hit your goal. Surpassed the goal. So the book is funded. If people back it today, they will get it. Have I noticed you didn't have any stretch goals put in place? Are you not doing stretch goals for this campaign? Have you thought of any?
Oh, I
Um,
totally am doing stretch goals. I put them in a update. I just straight up forgot to put them in the page. Um, so that's a great reminder. And so hopefully by the time someone's listening to this, those will already be listed on the page. But we do have 3 stretch goals that I have planned. The first one, which we've already hit, is that all the backers are going to get a 30-minute audio commentary, um, which is just going to be me recording myself talking about the history of the book and how I made it, and giving a hint of what's coming next in the series. Um, and then the $18,000 stretch goal is that everyone is actually going to get a print. All the physical backers will get a print copy of Unicorn Vampire Hunter #1. That'll be that first edition of #1. Um, because I have, with especially after Scout sent me comps for #1, I have a lot of copies of issue 1, because when I did issue 1, I ordered enough to keep me going for a long time. And so, but eventually, they will sell out. And I thought that it would be a cool opportunity for people who back this to get that first edition copy of the first issue. So that will just be free to everyone who is a physical backer. And then at $20,000, we're going to do a trading card. And we didn't do any other trading cards on this campaign. Normally, I do trading cards as add-ons, and I didn't do it for this one. Um, but I have a trading card everyone will get for free that I'll reveal when we hit $20,000. And then I have some other ideas for higher stretch goals, but I don't, like what they say about the chickens and hatching and all that stuff. So
Yeah, that's always awkward when I see some people put like, and here if we make it to 50,000, and
right.
I want to just look at them and be like, dude, you ain't making it 50. I'm sorry, you just ain't making it there.
I would
But
love to make 50,000 someday, but I don't. It's not going to happen on this campaign. So
yeah, it's no offense to you, it's I when you're at a point in the campaign, I think I've been doing this long enough. I can tell where you'll end up.
Oh, for sure.
You
Yeah,
know,
no, and like I said, this is my 19th campaign. I have a very good idea of where we'll end up, which is why I listed out the stretch goals to $20,000, because basically I think that there's a chance we'll hit that.
yeah,
And trying to make goals above that is would be just like wishful thinking. As much as, I do all the things to promote and whatever, and I always want it to go higher. Um, there is yeah, like you said, you get good at estimating where things are going to end up.
yeah,
And
and
yeah,
20,000 is not an easy feat.
no, in
Like,
fact, if I hit 20,000, it will only be my third time having hit it. Um, I hit it with last year with Unicorn Vampire Hunter when I did issues 4 and 5. And then earlier this year, I did that graphic novel I was mentioning earlier, which was a King Arthur graphic novel that I hit just about 20,000 on. I just ticked over. I wasn't sure I would make it. It was like in the last day, I just ticked over 20,000. So that was really exciting. Um, but as a creator and or as a creative person at all, like you're always like, okay, what's the next thing, right? Like,
yeah,
what's my campaign that's going to hit 30K, right? But I can't help that. It's like that's like the um, my I was talking to a friend of mine who I play Dungeons and Dragons with, and he's like, "Man, you do so many things. Like you have this like grind, like rise and grind mindset." He's like, "You seem like the kind of person who wakes up at 5 a.m. to go on a run." And I was like, "Well, I mean, that's what I did this morning, but." So.
I like to think I get stronger throughout the day, and then by about this time at night, it's like, okay, time for bed. No, I remember, and he keeps coming up on the show. But my name drop of the day, my good friend Travis Gibb, who when he did Cthulhu Invades Oz, and he set that at 20,000, and him telling me after the fact that that was the most difficult month of his life, trying to get that
Didn't he
goal.
raise? I thought he raised like 50,000 on that campaign.
I don't think so. I remember for a while there, he was having a really tough time.
Oh, maybe it was a different one. I think there was a campaign that he did that raised 50,000. I don't remember which one it was. Uh, but yeah, no, I mean for sure, it's huge. I mean, trying to get numbers like that is difficult, and that from what I know, from what I remember about that campaign, he it's an anthology, which is a huge undertaking. I did a couple anthologies
Hmm.
years ago, and I don't do them anymore because there's too much work. So hats off to him for doing that. Uh, but and it's expensive.
Yeah, he's done a couple too. So, but yeah, I guess last thing I'd love to chat with you about, because I discovered this when I was doing some reading earlier today about you, is you also have a podcast.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah.
Crowd Blunders, what's this all about?
Ha. So Crowd Blunders is it's supposed to be a weekly podcast, although it's we're not that great about it. My friend Alan Dunford and I have this podcast where we talk about all the mistakes we've made on crowdfunding and what we learned from them. Um, so every episode we start by talking about a mistake that you can make on Kickstarter and then or any crowdfunding, and then how we made that mistake, how we screwed up, and then we kind of talk about what lessons we learned from it. And sometimes we have guests on to talk about it, and sometimes it's just the two of us. And Alan Dunford, if you don't know, is the co-author of books like Pocus Hocus and Grandma Chainsaw. Um, and he has a book on Kickstarter right now called Horus in Hell, which is about a cute pink bunny rabbit who is like fights his way through hell. It's a lot of fun. But anyway, so he and I host this podcast, and it's a short form, half an hour podcast where we just talk about how we screwed up. It's a lot of fun, and we try to do it every week, but life gets in the way, and it's sort of a little side venture for us. So it's more like every 2 to 3 weeks a new episode comes out, but we try to keep doing it as much as we can.
So it sounds to me like this is a show for kind of the budding creator or somebody who's on Kickstarter to kind of learn from your mistakes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's a very, very niche audience. It's specifically for creators on like comic book creators on Kickstarter. And I would say that specifically for, like you said, people just sort of starting out. And our hope is that people can like hear about our mistakes that we made and try to avoid them. Although, as with so many things, I would say that, experience is the greatest teacher, right? And like, there were plenty of things that people told me that I ought to do or not do or avoid that I did anyway. Um, and I learned the hard way on a lot of things. Um, but I also don't pretend to be definitely don't pretend to be a guru or someone who really knows what's happening. That's why the concept of the show is crowd blunders. Like, oh, what did we do wrong? Like, how do we know this was wrong and this we screwed up in this way, and like, what do we think that we could do to improve on that? Um, so we make fun of ourselves a lot on the show, but yeah.
Very cool. So yeah, Caleb, I think that's everything. I mean, the campaign looks great. I'm really excited to check out the full story finally after only getting to read one issue. But for people out there that want to follow you for this and beyond, where's the best place to send them? You do Twitter or Instagram, any of that?
I do have Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Caleb Palmquist, but the place you want to go to follow what I'm doing is calebpalmquist.com or unicornvampirehunter.com. They go to the same place, and there is a information about all my books on that website, and most importantly, there's a link to sign up for my newsletter. I do a weekly newsletter where I give information about all my latest books, or sometimes just like musings about comic books. But that I'm religious about. Whereas I often go months at a time where I forget that Twitter exists. So I definitely, you can follow me on social media, but I can't guarantee you'll learn anything useful or even see me post ever. That newsletter, though, that's the number one place to follow me for sure.
It's because Caleb lives a much healthier life than the rest of us in this industry.
Well, I mean, I would say that you could ask my therapist about that, and he might not agree. But
So, to everybody out there watching and listening, you know the deal. There's links in the show notes down below to the Kickstarter, to Caleb's website, all that. So make sure to check out the content. I personally guarantee that the first issue of this series is really good, but Vampire Detective in Space is an awesome series, and I look forward to reading more of Unicorn. So, Caleb, thanks so much for taking the time today. I appreciate it, and I look forward to the next one, man.
thank you so much.